This is stage 13, Neversink. First pass, 9.06 miles. That would also be 9.60 or 06 miles is the front of Megan's flags. So we ran all of this yesterday twice. We get to run the first 9 miles 3 times today. We're looking at a 250, left 5 Titan, into small crest 50, left 6 plus, into small crest, into right 5 plus 250. AKA floor it until you hear left 4 opens. Hey guys! We are armed. Thank you. Thanks for working, guys.
You bet.
We really appreciate it. Good. We love it too. Okay. 15. 10. 5. 4. 3. 2, 1, go! Left 5 Titan, into small crest 50, left 6 plus, into small crest, into right 5 plus, 250, go, go, go. This is right 5 plus, 250. Long small crest, into right 6 Titan, long over double small crest, 50.
Chicken.
Yep. Here's your double small crest, left 4 open. Into right 6 plus, 70. Right 5 plus, left 5 over small crest 100. Right 5 minus, 150. Flat small crest 250. Right 6 into small crest 50. Chicane right entry. Keep going, 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 keep going. Oh, okay. You chose correctly there. Left 3 minus, no cut, 120. Nice. Right 6, extra very long, 70. Left 5, very long. Into right 5, long over small crest 100.
So it's a long?
Right 5 long, small crest 100. Right 6 plus, no cut, 250. Caution small crest into a left 4 plus, no cut, long. Right 6 plus, 100. Left 5 minus, 100. Right 5, Titan 4, 100. Right 5, open Titan 4 plus, no cut. Into crest, left 6 over bumps. Into right 6 plus over small crest, 120. Left 4 late over crest, open long over small crest. 50, left 4. Into right 5. Here's your left 4. into right 5. Caution left 6 over crest and chicane left entry. Chicane left entry. 350. Nice. Left 6 over crest, 120. Left 6 into right 4 minus long gear. Right 4 minus long gear. Don't brake for this. Or it's not as much. Go, go, go. This is 250. Flat crest, 150. Flat small crest, 150. Flat small crest, 180. Left 4 long, 70. Right 5 plus long over small crest, tighten, long. Small crest. Into right 6, extra long, 50. Caution left 4 minus down. There it is. Into turn right 3 minus, no cut, slippy, 150. Stay right over small crest 70, right 5 plus, open over small crest, go. Left 6, 50. Right 6 plus into flat small crest 200.
There's a car up there.
Yep. Flat long crest, commit 250.
Flat
There,
long
okay.
crest.
Yep,
Go.
Yep. Down, chicane right, entry. Keep going, keep going. Left 3. Small crest 50. Caution jump into right 5 minus down 70. Left 5 over crest into right 4 very long camber. Into left 6 over crest 50. Right 5 minus no cut. Caution small jump into left 3 long over bridge loose opens. Loose opens. 250. Small jump into left 4 plus over bumps 50. Right 5 over small crest very long. Left 6 plus. Long crest into left 5 down tidy. Into right 6 plus over small crest long 300. Left 6, 120. Small crest 50. Left 5 minus no cut. Right 5 plus very long 70. Oh, this is left 5 minus no cut. Right 5 plus very long 70. Left 6, 70. Left 6, 70 again. Left 6, 250. Keep it in, keep it in. Go, go, go. 250. Right 5 plus, late. Left 6, tidy. Caution 100, brake, chicane left entry, brake on tarmac. Left 6 plus over small crest 70, turn left 2 plus. Into right 4 plus. Nice. 50. Left 5, 200. Long small crest into turn right 5, no cut. This
No
is
plus?
No plus. Right 5, no cut, 100. Much nicer. Flat small crest 70, left 6 plus 200. Left 6 plus 350. Right 6 plus, very long. Repeat, 6 plus, very long. Into small crest. Into left 5 over small crest 250. Go, go, go! Okay, that was it. Stop.
No, this is it.
Oh. Jesus.
I didn't think it was it.
Okay, good job.
Okay. Good job.
I saw the flag and I was like, oh shit, that's it. Oh well. Hey! Okay.